Hello, and welcome back to another video. I finally got around to being able to watch the series finale of Better Call Saul, Saul Gone, and I thought today we could just chat about it, and I would go through this post-episode discussion thread that I came across on Reddit. So it was interesting to see, as I was watching it, what predictions that I had read previously actually were true, and some were actually pretty spot on, so that was interesting to see. But yeah, I'm just gonna read through that thread. I'll just go in order of the comments and which was posted first. So with that, sit back, relax, and let's get started. And then just one other thing before I start reading is I would love to hear your thoughts on the episode, on the series overall. So, if you have any, I would love to read them in the comments. So, okay, here we go. I love that by the end, Jimmy and Kim have essentially become characters from the old movies they used to love watching together. I loved the ending. It was beautiful and heartbreaking. The thought that Jimmy and Kim will never sit together in the sofa to watch a BW movie kills me. The last time was the night Howie walked into their apartment. This show, I am hurt, best TV experience of my life. Ironically enough, this is probably the purest that Jimmy's ever been. Him having hope and reconnecting with Kim on his first actual path to redemption was beautiful. Sad undertones, but a somehow happy ending regardless. Jimmy may be in prison, but he found his soul. Contrast that to Saul Goodman, who had one hell of a luxurious life, but an empty life all the same. I also loved that Kim wasn't just his only real partner, but also the only real role model for Jimmy. All the other close relationships that he admired because they were on par with him intellectually and successfully, Chuck, Mike, Walter, were shown again this episode with all their mistakes and regrets, and most importantly, the fact that they viewed themselves as victims of the circumstances and therefore never did a meaningful thing to make any of it right. Kim was the first person that he admired who ever chose to do the right thing eventually. She was Jimmy's first good role model. Who else remembered the cold open of the season 6 premiere where the cardboard cutout of Saul was put in the dumpster? Also, the Time Machine book can be seen during that cold open, as well as the painting that Howard's blood splattered on. So much foreshadowing. I thought for a second that the Time Machine book was what Gold was talking about when he said there was an object the episode would call back, but I dismissed it and figured it would be the tequila stopper instead. I really loved the Mike farewell. He starts off by saying if he could go back in time, that he would stop his son's murder. That is, that his biggest regret is letting them kill his son. But he stops himself and realizes that he regrets becoming himself. He recognizes that his lifestyle, his corruption, is what got his son killed. He wishes he could take it all back, never have his son killed, never get into the cartel business or the drug business. I loved the contrast with the Walt scene. Mike didn't take the question with malice. He's been put through the ringer, and he doesn't mind taking a moment for introspection. Walt, on the other hand, rebels at the very idea. I think the way Mike reacted to Jimmy's question there was interesting, in contrast to how he treats Saul with disgust. In the scene at the well, Jimmy is being genuine at least, while asking the question, and Mike amuses the idea. But as Saul in Breaking Bad, he's lost touch with his genuine self, and Mike is disgusted by that. I was really happy we got a final Mike scene. He always had the best wisdom, and I'm glad that both Jesse and Jimmy got really good advice that helped them get the resolution they needed in life. Oakley asking to withdraw from the case was the funniest thing. Saul really screwed over every other lawyer in that room. Of course, Oakley, but the prosecutors also looked like fools in front of the judge. First, they walk in with a crap deal, and then the guy throws it back in their face anyway and confesses. Your observation reminds me of another time Jimmy did the same thing with the copier sales job. He got them to give him the job on the spot and threw it back in their faces, and then stole that little figurine. As an aside for anyone who happens to read this, I loved that Walter looks at the watch Jesse gave him when he thinks about regrets. Of course, he doesn't admit it, but it's nice to see that he does harbor guilt about what happened to Jesse. It also makes Walt saving Jesse and Felina more meaningful. Walt, the day after the events that took place, being asked by Saul if he has any regrets, made me laugh hard. Your brother-in-law was killed, your family hates you, and you're on the run for the rest of your life. Any regrets? Oh yeah, selling my share of the company I started in college. Pretty bad mistake, to be honest. And then a follow-up to that is, to be fair, none of the events of Breaking Bad would have happened if he was still a gray matter partner. He would have probably never set foot in Albuquerque or met Skylar even. Walt getting pissed off at the concept of time machines was so perfectly in character for him. And the fact that he keeps tinkering with the water heater, making a mild nuisance into an unbearable racket. That's Walt in a nutshell, and they captured it perfectly. Nice callback to the episode in Breaking Bad where he is on this manic quest to replace his family's water heater. I love that Mike, the tough guy that he was, had a genuine moment of introspection with Jimmy. He was honest, vulnerable, and kind. Then Walt was just a jerk to him about the same question. It kinda showed with Mike how Jimmy wasn't honest enough with himself to be vulnerable, but then with Walt, it seemed like he got closer to being honest, but was shut down constantly by Walt's attitude. Walt's quote-unquote vulnerability was the same cheap, ego-driven, I wish I was rich fantasy that younger Jimmy was starting to grow out of. I was really enjoying how we got to see Walt at his worst again. I was worried the writers would be precious with him and make him sympathetic or badass or something too cool. But instead, he's just a jerk, abusing and second-guessing Jimmy, just like so many other characters we've seen. Bringing up the malpractice insurance was great, the one thing that Jimmy knew about, and he laid it all on the table. The suits at the end: public defender, elder law, Davis and Maine, Saul, Cinnabon, prison. Those little end of episode snippets were so exciting every week. Such an empty feeling right now. It pleases me to think about how furious Walt would have been with Saul taking all that credit in the end. When they promised you won't see Breaking Bad in the same way, it's very possible that they meant something about Lalo and Howard being buried underneath the lab. Two central Better Call Saul characters who don't really exist in Breaking Bad outside of one throwaway line. For me, it was always the role that Saul played in pulling the strings on the entire meth business. All they asked him to do was to help Badger in any way other than rolling on Heisenberg. We got to see in Better Call Saul that Mike even advised Saul to let Walt go on his own because it wasn't worth what would happen if they did business together. But instead, Saul chose to get involved and coach Walt through distribution, money laundering, and ultimately escape, which of course Walt ended up backing out on. If Saul never gets involved, the cousins kill Walt in his bedroom and it's over. Saul was 100% right by saying he was the reason things progressed the way that they did, not Walt. Taking credit, nothing. He was right. Walt always mistook intelligence for cleverness. He was dangerously naive, and the early violence and troubles of the show were testament to that. He was, in Office Space terms, looking up money laundering in the dictionary. I absolutely believe Saul's craftiness helped enable his transition into success. But yes, Walt would absolutely hate the thought of the whole of it, needing Saul and Saul taking credit for his success. Jimmy becoming the folk hero of the prison was perfect. Of course, he may be in prison, but now he gets to be himself. He'll be trading law tips for cigarettes and ramen in no time. Maybe even some ice cream. Saul's gone. Jimmy McGill is reborn. I should have tried harder. Sort of sums up the theme of the show perfectly for me. I tried, but I should have tried harder. Maybe also what Chuck was thinking after Jimmy left that night. I'm so glad that Chuck finally said that they just have the same conversation every time, because I knew he knew that, but it was never explicitly stated. And I don't know if anyone has a relative that you have that with, but it's so good to see on screen as well, and how toxic it is. Saul Goodman's last appearance in Breaking Bad was Granite State. He said this to Walter White while holding out at Ed the Extractor's place. And this is formatted where it's a line from Saul and then a line from Walt, so it alternates, so I'll indicate who's saying what. So it starts with Saul. You mind if I give you a nickel's worth of advice? Just for old time's sake? You're worried about your wife and kids? Don't leave. The way things are now, some people, not me mind you, but some people might say you're leaving her high and dry. Walt. Some people would be ignorant on the facts. Some people wouldn't know that as far as the police are concerned, Skylar is a blameless victim. No. Go ahead. Get it off your chest. Go on. Saul. The phone call was a smart move. Kudos to you. Odds are it was recorded. It'll play great for a jury. It might even buy her a mistrial in a year and a half. Until then, if they don't have you, they go after her. Walt. There's no point. She knows nothing. Saul. Well, too bad. She's got nothing to trade. I hate to be a downer here, but there are 2 DEA agents missing, presumed dead. Think the feds will let that go because you hit the ejector seat? First thing they're gonna do, they will RICO your wife and kids out of the house. That condo is gone. Your bank accounts, they're frozen. Her picture is probably on TV right now, next to yours. Who's gonna hire her? Walt. Money is no problem. Saul. Well, I don't mean to contradict you, but getting it to her? Impossible. The feds are praying that you'll make contact. The internet, the phone, it's all tapped. Hey, Mike was no dummy, but every time he tried to get his nest egg to his granddaughter, it ended up in Uncle Sam's pockets. Walt. So you propose what? Saul. Stay. Face the music. I mean, how much time have you got left? You walk in with your head held high. Be the John Dillinger of the Metropolitan Detention Center. How bad is that? In the end, Jimmy came back. He was brave, and he was brave in a way Walt never could be. Jimmy ran away, like he always did, and he went crazy as Gene and practically dared the police to arrest him through his reckless behavior. But in the end, he took his own advice. He faced the music. He walked into prison, head held high, and was a celebrity and instantly respected. In the end, Jimmy did all of that, and it turned out he didn't just save Kim, he saved his real self. Absolutely beautiful, poetic ending. Bravo, Jimmy. Jimmy whittled them down to 7 years just to prove that he could do it. The mouth on this guy. End of an era, so bittersweet. Remember the phone conversation where Kim told him to turn himself in, and he basically said, "You first"? Well, she turned herself in, and he followed once he found out. Kim always held him together, and in the end, this was their story. The fact that Saul was able to talk his sentence down to 7 years is truly a work of art. He was a damn good lawyer. Some would say the best. Anybody else dying over the fact that Kim scammed her way into the prison using her old bar card to visit Jimmy? The Chuck flashback seems to have taken place the day before the first episode of the show. From Saul Gone. Jimmy: I'll see you tomorrow, Chuck, and I might have the Financial Times. From Uno. Chuck: Oh, Financial Times. Jimmy: I know you missed it, so I figured, what the heck. Also, the Fuji apples. Chuck had to ask Ernesto for them specifically, but Jimmy knew to bring them. Chuck also asks Jimmy if he got the ice from a motel. Jimmy tells Ernesto if he doesn't want to have to buy the ice, he usually just steals it from a hotel. Bob Odenkirk is gonna get Better Call Saul chanted at him for the rest of his life. That scene totally tells me that it's a bittersweet ending for Jimmy. Yeah, he's doing 86 years. Hard time in a supermax. However, there's not an inmate in there that doesn't see him as a rock star. He's Saul Goodman, man, the third head of the biggest narcotic empire in American history. And he's here. Not only that, but they're probably also thinking, I get in good with this guy, maybe he can help my case. In fact, that's kind of how I imagine the rest of Jimmy's story goes. He's in his mid-70s, and he's still counseling his fellow inmates in the law library. He's even sometimes granted special permission to act as co-counsel in some cases, outside of the court, of course. He's going to be treated like a rock star in there, no doubt. And when the younger guys come in, they'll respect him because the block elders will tell them to respect him. It's sad because he loses Kim and his freedom, but it's a happy ending because he'll always get to do what he does best, the law and the ways around it. The whole series is essentially about Jimmy's search for that validation and respect from someone, starting with Chuck. But Chuck looked down on Jimmy his whole life. Then, throughout the series, everyone sees Jimmy and/or Saul as a snake. For example, Mike and Walt look down on Jimmy, a point driven home by Mike saying, "It's all about money to you," paraphrasing. And Walt going so far as to say he'd never hire Saul to help him with gray matter and that Saul was always like this, as well as his colleagues. Example: everyone at the courthouse shunning him because of his complicity in helping Lalo's skip bail thing, Francesca despising him, etc. The only person who ever saw the good in Jimmy was Kim. But as Jimmy transformed into Saul, it became harder and harder for Kim to do so. Eventually, her respect for him comes to an end too, culminating with Jimmy going full Saul during the divorce paper signing, and Kim telling Jesse that she essentially doesn't even know him anymore. In the finale, Jimmy Saul is given a choice between Jimmy and Saul. Choosing Saul would have meant taking a sweetheart plea deal, but if he chose Saul, he'd always be Saul. Jimmy would be gone for good. Jimmy would never ever have any chance of getting the validation, respect he's always wanted from Kim or anyone else. Choosing Jimmy, on the other hand, means that Jimmy's going to spend his life in prison. But with Saul gone for good, Jimmy finally has the respect of at least one person, and that's really all he ever wanted. The look Kim exchanged with Jimmy after he admitted everything in the courtroom, particularly I think his admission of regret about Chuck, was as powerful as the reaction Skylar had when Walt acknowledged his actions were all for himself. The combination of pity, understanding, pain, and love all in a single look. Absolutely brilliant. They did great foreshadowing that confession throughout the whole episode. Conversation with Mike gets personal, Jimmy bails. Conversation with Walt gets personal, Jimmy bails. I love that once he finds out Kim gave her confession, he has the realization that it's the right thing to do. And not just that it's right, but that it's okay. I liked how in the Chuck flashback, the book he brought him was the time machine, implying that if Jimmy could go back and change one thing, it would be that moment. Really cool way to answer the question by showing, not telling, and having him explain it all. And then there's a follow-up. That moment, as in he would have let Chuck look over his client cases with him, potentially leading to a mend in their relationship. Yes, that was his different path he could have taken, but they both let it slip by. I think that's the key idea, really. A lot of people talk about the breakdown in Chuck and Jimmy's relationship as being about Jimmy's inability to change, but I think that scene really encapsulated that they're both at fault. When Jimmy tells Chuck that he's doing Chuck shopping because you're my brother, you do the same for me, Chuck realizes for a moment that he wouldn't do the same for Jimmy. That flash of guilt encourages him to suggest that they sit and talk for a bit, but Jimmy's gut reaction is that Chuck only wants to belittle him more. Chuck's hurt, no doubt, by the recognition that Jimmy's reaction isn't unfounded, so Chuck hits back by accusing Jimmy of stealing the ice. It's a really sad scene the more you think about it. Both are clearly desperate to have a relationship with the other, but both let their pride get in the way of actually embracing it. What a character. That confession reassured he was the Jimmy she once loved. Nailed it, and her look of understanding ensured to Jimmy that she got it, and at least one other person in the world saw Jimmy instead of Saul and Jean. Kim was the one juror he needed to convince. At the heart of it, Better Call Saul is a love story after all. Jimmy going from 7 years to 86 years, and that last conversation with Kim. What a brilliant experience this show was. Smoking a cigarette together just as the start. Incredible. Too bad we never got to find out what Lalo would have done with the time machine. Nothing. Lalo has lived his best life since day one. Seriously, I don't think he has any regrets. This episode reminded me of how much of a jerk Walt was to those around him. Jimmy, so what would you do with the time machine? Walt, shut up. For real. I've always been in Walt was always a jerk camp, more or less. Breaking Bad obviously exacerbated his worst nature to an extreme, but I think that encounter in the basement with Saul more or less frames exactly the vibe he gives off to most people most of the time. It's a funny thing to reflect on too when considered from Jesse's perspective, since Breaking Bad is mostly Walt's perspective, and we're strung along with any number of reasons to buy in excuses for his behavior. Jesse truly had him figured out from the start. I think the thing everyone forgot along the way was that Saul has always cared about people. He got wrapped up in the money at times and could be a jerk, but that was always a mask to hide the pain. Jimmy was always fighting to be a better person. Tonight, he finally became honorable. Having the flashback of Walt and Jesse kidnapping Saul from his perspective tie into Saul's story to cut down his prison sentence was unbelievably brilliant writing. Best Lie is one with some truth in it. He could have milked the truth to the tune of mint chocolate chip ice cream once a week and less than a decade at a white-collar camp resort. Instead, he chose the darker ending to make it a happy ending. If it had suddenly burst into color at any point, it would have been a lie. We only got the glint of color coming back into his life as he shared a silent moment with Kim. He didn't want to get out of prison in 7 years just to be alone again. He would rather be in prison forever and be able to look Kim in the eye and know he had done the right thing. Yep, when his one phone call is to Cinnabon, not a family member or loved one. That's honestly the scene where I realized there's still hope in Jimmy. He took his one call to do a genuinely unselfish thing. Reminded me of Gus calling Lyle while he's bleeding out on a couch. God, what a gut stab of a final scene. The show doesn't flinch or look for the bright side of the story. The world stays black and white. Jimmy and Kim both silently acknowledge that he'll die in prison. The final shot could be the last time Kim sees Jimmy. But just for a little bit, the cigarette's ember glowed orange. I think that's the most impactful bit. They were each the love of each other's life, but life and poor decisions can prevent people from being with the ones they were potentially meant to be with. Panning to the exit sign and the electrical sound during the mentioning of Chuck was brilliant. Jimmy confessing to the Chuck insurance scam in the courtroom and the shot of the exit sign in the corner brought tears to my eyes. What a fantastic shot. Also, the restaurant scene being Gus's, presumably, last scene in the Breaking Bad Better Call Saul universe was a fantastic decision in my view. I'm glad that bookmarked his character arc. I also loved the opening scene with Mike so much. I'm gonna miss this show. Agreed. Gus leaving before he has the chance to be happy and get even slightly distracted. Living a sad and lonely life in the pursuit of his vengeance. The thing that ultimately kills him. Really nails down the character. There it is, the end. I like the resolution to Jimmy and Kim's relationship. At the end of it all, the only person he still cared about was her, and by finally admitting to it all, he closes the book on all that's happened over the years. She finally got to see him actually be remorseful about Chuck years later. She can even just begin to move on. One last smoke with Jimmy. Not Saul, Jimmy. I think the ending with the prisoners is perfect as well. If there is one thing Jimmy did, it was give the best representation he could give to every client he had. That last line from Chuck, "There's no shame in going back and changing your path," tied everything together beautifully. Obviously, in the moment, he's trying to manipulate Jimmy into giving up his career as a lawyer. But you look at how his and the other two conversations about the time machine blend together and it all comes together as to why he confessed. Mike's is all about the residual, heavy regrets that you carry on. They linger with you like a weight, and as much as you try to wake up one day and forget, there are simply some that you'll never forget about. Things that you'll always carry, like Howard's and Chuck's death, and in Mike's case, what I assume was his son's death, and before that, his first turn down the bad choice road. Walt literally brings up that yes, obviously you can't go back into a time machine to change your choices. Saul's knee spiel and the "so you've always been this way" from Walter is pretty funny, but also reaffirms that even up until the very end, as Saul, he still couldn't come to terms with his brother and what he'd said. But when Jimmy confesses, he takes a little bit of what he heard from Mike, Walter, and Chuck and chooses to change the past by completely altering the story he told the prosecution. He comes out fully about his part in Howard and Chuck, admits the rest of his crimes, and I think he ultimately accepts that if he's out in the real world, he'll never change, as Chuck had said. Gene Victor proved that the moment he went back to Jeff. This was the last chance he had to change his path, and he took it, and was finally, truly, all rested, as he'd said to Mike at the beginning. The cold open with the last ever scene with Mike is when it really hit me that this was the last time I was gonna watch these iconic characters. I was kinda surprised to see Gene get caught so early in the episode, but the fact that this was an anticlimactic end for the Gene story was perfect. Saul getting Bill Oakley as co-counsel was a real curveball, but I loved the fact that he played a pretty big part in this episode. I missed his appearances in the courthouse in the later seasons. I was actually hyped to see Marie again, as she never really got a last closure scene in Breaking Bad. Last scene with her character was just calling Skylar to tell her Walt is in town. It was great to see her talk about what a great guy Hank was. It really gave her character closure I never knew that I needed. It's crazy to think that if Saul didn't even mention the stuff about Howard to add on to his already too good to be true deal, he would have never knew about what Kim did and would have easily taken the 7-year plea deal. The Walt scene was nothing short of perfect. It hit every heartbeat as to why we loved watching this despicable anti-hero for 5 seasons. I'm so glad this is the last scene we get as Bryan Cranston as the iconic character. The courtroom scene where Jimmy kills Saul and spills his guts about the truth and how he shows honest-to-God true emotions about the death of Howard and how he helped drive Chuck to kill himself might be Bob Odenkirk's best acting in the entire series. It was great seeing Chuck again. The scene felt like it was pulled right from the first season. I loved the "no, I wouldn't" face he made when Jimmy said, "You would do it for me." Jimmy going to prison for life is definitely a depressing ending on paper, but it's kind of bittersweet that he actually gets to be himself in prison and that he's kind of like a celebrity. The last Kim and Jimmy scene being a callback to their first scene sharing a cigarette was so surreal watching it, knowing that this is the last time these characters, who still clearly love each other, will probably ever interact, was such a great way to end this masterpiece series. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there, as a lot of the comments are starting to get repetitive. But as I mentioned in the beginning, Feel free to drop some comments around your thoughts about the series and about the episode. And I do plan on making some more Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul videos in the future. So even though the series has come to an end, I still plan on making some more content about it. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, again, feel free to just leave them in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have